Mark and Lisa Johnson seemed like the perfect suburban couple, polite, quiet, and devoted to their family. But behind closed doors, they were starving their 9-year-old son to just 30 pounds, hiding a nightmare that no neighbor could have imagined. The night was bitterly cold, and the streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood were nearly empty, save for the occasional car passing by. Inside the Johnson home, an unsettling silence had settled, broken only by the faintest sounds that carried through the thin walls. The neighbors had become accustomed to the household's unusual quiet, noting that the boy, only 9 years old, was rarely seen outside, unlike other children who played freely in the yards and parks. But on this night, something different pierced the calm. A feeble cry, barely audible, almost like a whisper struggling to escape. One neighbor, a woman in her 70s who lived directly across the street, had been unable to sleep. The sound tugged at her conscience. She debated whether she was overreacting, but the thought of a child in danger was too powerful to ignore. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling as she gave the operator the details. She couldn't see what was happening, but the urgency in the boy's voice was unmistakable. A fragile call for help that demanded immediate attention. Within minutes, the wail of sirens shattered the stillness of the night as police cars screeched to a halt in front of the Johnson residence. Officers approached cautiously, aware that domestic situations could be volatile. The front door was locked, and when they knocked, it was a long moment before a weary, pale man opened it. He looked surprised, almost too calm, as if he hadn't expected anyone to show up at this hour. The officers' eyes immediately scanned the interior, and what they saw made their stomachs turn. A child, no older than 9, stood in the kitchen, his limbs thin and frail, his clothes hanging loosely as though they were several sizes too large. The boy's skin was a patchwork of bruises, old scars, and the sallow pallor of malnutrition. His ribs protruded sharply beneath the surface, and his eyes, wide and fearful, seemed to flicker between hope and resignation. Medical professionals were called, and paramedics moved quickly, lifting him gently from the floor, their hands careful not to jostle his fragile body. The boy's condition was critical. He was dehydrated, malnourished, and on the brink of organ failure. In the ambulance, he drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring fragments of words that hinted at the abuse he had endured for months, maybe years. The officers remained in the house, gathering whatever they could before it would be altered or destroyed. They noticed the remnants of meager meals, crumbs of bread, an empty cup of water, and the small, cold bedroom that had been his prison. The environment was stark, almost clinical in its neglect. Evidence of deliberate starvation was everywhere, scales with handwritten notes, charts that recorded the boy's shrinking weight, and cupboards filled with untouched food meant for the parents. The careful documentation suggested a methodical plan rather than random neglect, a terrifying realization that the boy's suffering had been orchestrated. As the night deepened, the magnitude of the crime became clear. A child, barely surviving, had been subjected to calculated torment while the adults responsible maintained an outwardly normal life. The officers exchanged grim looks, knowing this was only the beginning of an investigation that would uncover a shocking story of cruelty hidden behind a facade of normalcy. The Johnsons had carefully cultivated an image of normalcy that few questioned. To the outside world, they were a quiet, respectable couple who kept to themselves but participated in neighborhood events and community functions. They waved to neighbors from their front porch, attended church services regularly, and even volunteered for local charity drives. Their home appeared tidy, welcoming, and unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the suburban landscape. Children in the area were often seen playing freely, yet the Johnson's son was almost never among them. Many assumed he was homeschooled or simply shy, and this small absence went largely unquestioned. The couple's outward appearance of normal life provided a convincing mask, one that would eventually make the revelations of abuse even more shocking to those who had once trusted them implicitly. Inside the house, however, the reality was vastly different. Investigators would later uncover a carefully maintained system of control that dictated every aspect of the boy's daily life. Meals were denied or strictly rationed, and the child was punished for the slightest infractions, sometimes being locked alone in his room for hours on end. The home, while neat and orderly, held hidden evidence of suffering. Small, almost invisible bruises on his arms and legs, remnants of meager scraps in the kitchen, and handwritten notes that documented his weight loss and behavior. It became clear that the Johnsons had engineered a private world where the boy existed solely under their terms, a world designed to break him down both physically and emotionally. Neighbors' testimonies painted a stark contrast between public perception and private reality. They described seeing the Johnsons gardening, smiling politely, or helping carry groceries, ordinary, harmless gestures that would not hint at the horrors unfolding behind closed doors. Some noted that the boy was rarely outside, but no one questioned it seriously. The parents' polite and composed demeanor was enough to allay concern. Even family friends who visited occasionally found the couple charming and attentive, further reinforcing the illusion of care. No one could have guessed that within the same walls, a child's life was being meticulously controlled, his body slowly deteriorating from lack of nutrition. Investigators also uncovered a disturbing pattern of secrecy and manipulation. The Johnsons had created an environment in which the boy was isolated from the outside world, rarely allowed to interact with others, and constantly monitored. They restricted access to food, water, and basic necessities, sometimes allowing him to eat only scraps or nothing at all. Every aspect of his life was regimented and documented in secret notebooks that detailed daily weight measurements, punishments, and food schedules. These records revealed not only the meticulous planning behind the abuse, but also the parents' shocking indifference to their son's suffering. The house itself became a symbol of oppression, each room holding a silent testament to the cruelty that had been disguised under a veneer of normality. As detectives pieced together the boy's life, they realized the extent to which the Johnsons had manipulated perceptions. Their careful construction of a perfect household had allowed months of abuse to go unnoticed, creating a terrifying dichotomy between what the world saw and the truth hidden within the home. What had seemed like a typical suburban family now revealed itself as a calculated façade, concealing a level of cruelty that was methodical, deliberate, and chilling in its precision. The contrast between appearances and reality underscored a frightening truth. Evil can exist in plain sight, hiding behind a mask of normality that few dare to question. At the hospital, doctors were immediately struck by the boy's fragile condition. His body was emaciated, every bone visible beneath the pale, stretched skin. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize him, inserting IVs to address severe dehydration and administering high-calorie fluids to prevent organ failure. The child's small frame was a stark contrast to the average 9-year-old, and it became painfully clear that his weight loss was not due to illness alone. As he lay in the hospital bed, weak and trembling, the staff began documenting every sign of long-term abuse. Old bruises, scars, and the brittle texture of his hair suggested months, perhaps years, of neglect. Even breathing was a challenge for him, each shallow gasp a reminder of the body's struggle to survive on so little nourishment. The boy's presence alone demanded attention. He was a living record of deliberate cruelty. Slowly, as he grew stronger, the child began to reveal details of his life inside the Johnson home. His words were soft, hesitant, and broken by long pauses, but they painted a harrowing picture of systematic abuse. He described being forced to remain in his room for hours, sometimes days, without proper meals, while the parents ate freely in front of him. Any attempt to sneak food was met with severe punishment, leaving him fearful and obedient. The boy recounted the small measures he took to survive, like drinking water from the bathroom sink or eating tiny scraps hidden in corners, each action a desperate bid to stay alive. His account was fragmented but consistent, and medical staff and investigators began to piece together a timeline of intentional starvation that explained his critical condition. Evidence collected at the hospital and from the home corroborated the boy's testimony. Officers had found handwritten journals kept by the parents, meticulously tracking the child's weight and documenting punishments in ways that suggested deliberate planning rather than neglect. The boy's emaciated state matched the notes perfectly, and doctors confirmed that his body had been deprived of adequate calories for months. In addition, old injuries hinted at repeated physical abuse, indicating that starvation was only one aspect of the control the Johnsons exerted. The combination of physical, emotional, and nutritional abuse painted a grim picture of a child systematically broken down to ensure obedience and suffering. Hospital staff were astonished by the boy's resilience. Despite extreme malnutrition and trauma, he remained lucid and responsive, often observing the care around him with cautious curiosity. His ability to survive under such dire conditions became both a medical marvel and a testament to his willpower. As authorities continued their investigation, the child's narrative helped them reconstruct a timeline of abuse that extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Each detail he shared, however small, provided critical insight into the methods the Johnsons had used to isolate, control, and punish him. The combination of his testimony, medical findings, and evidence from the home left investigators with little doubt. This was not accidental neglect. The child's starvation had been methodical, calculated, and intended to break him physically and mentally. The hospital became a turning point in the investigation, as the boy's story gave voice to months of suffering that had remained hidden behind the Johnsons' façade. It was a chilling revelation. A child nearly destroyed by those who were supposed to protect him had survived long enough to expose the horrifying truth, forcing authorities to confront the full scope of a crime meticulously hidden from the world. As investigators delved deeper into the Johnsons' lives, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, one that revealed motives far darker than simple cruelty or neglect. They discovered that the couple had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on their son, listing themselves as the sole beneficiaries. The details of the policy were carefully scrutinized, and it quickly became apparent that the Johnsons had been planning for financial gain, calculating how to make their son's slow decline appear as a tragic but natural event. Every step of the abuse seemed methodical, each act carefully documented to ensure they could claim innocence if questioned. Investigators uncovered journals filled with notes about the boy's weight, meticulous records of punishments, and observations about his health. The writings were clinical, devoid of any empathy, detailing strategies to restrict food while monitoring his body's response. The evidence painted a chilling picture of a calculated plan rather than impulsive or thoughtless behavior. Further examination of the home revealed additional layers of secrecy and preparation. In the kitchen, cupboards were stocked with food for the parents, but systematically withheld from the child. The bedroom where the boy had spent most of his time was stark, almost prison-like, with only a thin mattress and a few worn possessions. Hidden within drawers and notebooks were notes outlining how long the boy could survive on certain amounts of food and how his physical state could be disguised to outsiders. Investigators noted the frightening precision with which the Johnsons had managed to maintain their household appearance while orchestrating an environment of starvation and fear. The duality between public perception and private reality was staggering. A calculated performance that allowed months of abuse to go unnoticed. As the case developed, it became evident that the Johnsons were not only abusive, but also manipulative. Friends and extended family members who had visited described them as polite, attentive, and seemingly caring. There were even accounts of the couple offering advice to other parents on child rearing, projecting an image of normalcy that clashed violently with the reality hidden behind closed doors. This façade was part of a broader strategy to deflect suspicion, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to recognize the extent of the boy's suffering. Investigators realized that the Johnsons had exploited societal trust, using the veneer of ordinary family life to cover a calculated pattern of abuse designed to achieve a financial objective. Digital records and communications further exposed the planning behind their actions. Searches on the family computer revealed that the Johnsons had looked up cases of child malnutrition and ways to avoid detection, suggesting that they were aware of the legal and social risks of their behavior. Emails and notes between the couple discussed the boy's declining weight in terms of statistics rather than human life, reinforcing the notion that their intent had been deliberate and premeditated. Every piece of evidence underscored the chilling reality. This was a crime built on meticulous preparation, cold calculation, and a complete disregard for the child's well-being. The investigation into the Johnsons' secret motives transformed the case from one of shocking abuse to a narrative of greed and manipulation. It was clear that the boy's suffering had been exploited for financial gain, with the parents' outward appearance of normalcy masking a horrifying plan. The depth of their planning, the deliberate starvation, and the meticulous records all pointed to a calculated and premeditated crime, one that authorities realized could have continued indefinitely if not for the intervention of a concerned neighbor. The layers of secrecy and intent revealed a level of cruelty that left investigators both horrified and determined to ensure that justice would be served. The trial of the Johnsons quickly captured national attention, drawing reporters, activists, and concerned citizens eager to follow a case that exposed unimaginable cruelty hidden behind a veneer of normalcy. Courtroom seats were filled with people who wanted to witness justice for a child whose life had been systematically endangered. Prosecutors presented a carefully compiled case, relying on a combination of medical evidence, testimony from the hospital staff, digital records, and the boy's own account of the abuse. Every detail reinforced the same chilling truth. This was not a case of neglect, but of calculated, intentional harm designed to control and exploit a vulnerable child. Graphic photographs of the boy's condition, combined with the meticulous notes kept by the Johnsons, painted a stark picture of deliberate cruelty. The defense attempted to argue that the parents had been overwhelmed or inexperienced, claiming that the extreme circumstances had spiraled beyond their control. They tried to frame the starvation as misguided discipline rather than deliberate malice. However, the evidence undermined every argument. Handwritten journals tracking the boy's weight, computer searches on child malnutrition, and detailed punishment schedules left little room for doubt about intent. Medical experts testified that the boy's condition could not have occurred without prolonged, deliberate deprivation and abuse. They explained how his organs had begun to fail, how his immune system had collapsed, and how close he had been to death. Each expert reinforced the notion that the Johnsons had orchestrated the abuse with a level of precision and planning that went far beyond ordinary parental negligence. The boy himself, though still fragile and recovering, contributed to the case in a closed session to protect his privacy. His testimony, though limited by his age and frailty, was poignant and devastating. He described the hunger, the fear, and the isolation with a clarity that shook the courtroom. His words gave voice to months of suffering, humanizing the statistics and photographs presented by the prosecution. Every story he shared, from drinking water from the bathroom sink to hiding scraps of food to survive, underscored his resilience in the face of deliberate cruelty. Observers in the courtroom were moved by his courage, realizing that this child had endured horrors that most adults could not imagine and had survived to ensure justice would be served. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that reflected the gravity of the crime. Both parents were found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder, child abuse, and fraud. The judge, in delivering the sentence, emphasized the premeditated nature of the abuse and the deliberate exploitation of the child for financial gain. Life imprisonment without parole was imposed, ensuring that the couple could no longer harm anyone else. The courtroom, while solemn, carried a sense of resolution, a collective acknowledgement of the suffering endured and the justice that had been secured. In the aftermath, the boy was placed in a safe foster home where he began the slow process of healing. He gradually gained weight, learned to trust again, and experienced care and affection for the first time in years. While the trauma would remain a part of him, his survival became a symbol of hope and resilience. Authorities emphasized the importance of community vigilance and intervention, noting that it was the concern of a neighbor that ultimately saved the child's life. The case left a lasting impression on all who followed it, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary appearances, but that courage, awareness, and timely action can prevent it from going unchecked.